Okay, would you all take your little iPad and push in your attend buttons? And then we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag Supervisor Locke with the invocation.
Bless us as we gather for the 2018 budget meeting. Guide our minds and hearts so that we will work for the good of our community. Teach us to be generous in our outlook, courageous in the face of difficulty, and wise in our decisions. Amen.
Amen.
You and me.
Supervisor Robel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move for the adoption of this evening's agenda.
Then moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak on anything on the agenda this evening or anything on the budget agenda? Now is your chance to talk. Yes, come up to the mic and state your...
Harrison Sturgis, Tononina, long lifetime resident. I'm here to comment about the article I saw in the newspaper about a North County dog park. I would like to refresh some memories regarding a North County dog park. First of all, I don't have a dog and I have no intention of getting one. About 17 years ago, I offered to donate 10 plus acres of a foundry sand landfill for a dog park, and the county could have purchased abutting property at a minimal fee for parking. My offer wasn't accepted. Now the county is proposing to spend $10,000 per year to rent property when the town of Neenah owns plenty of acreage they have had for many years very near an animal hospital and next to a cemetery, for which they collect yearly crop rent much less than $10,000. As a lifelong town of Neenah resident, I think it is time the town of Neenah steps forward and does something for the county. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on the budget this evening? Is there anybody else that would like to speak on the budget? That portion of the meeting will be closed. Reports from committees, commissions, and boards. Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to report attendance at the Esther 13th
Pull your
annual...
microphone in front up a little bit.
I would like to report on the Esther 13th annual banquet and celebration. My wife Elizabeth and I attended the 13th annual banquet and celebration for Esther, a faith-based social action organization committed to social justice. My interest in county board involvement with public safety is attracted to Esther's commitment to reduce the prison population. Sunday, November 5th, the keynote speaker, Glenn E. Martin, founder and president of Just Leadership USA, is a reformed felon, having served many years in prison and now spearheading a movement to reduce prison population by 50% by 2030. His reformed criminal life gives him a unique perspective on approaching efforts to reduce jail population. I too share the goal to reduce the prison population consistent with public safety. And I'd also like to, as a prelude to the forthcoming budget, like to share with you and county board members, because most of the members have been on the board for less than 5 years, and I'd like to share with them the work of the county board back in 2007. A special committee of 7 supervisors was established as the Personnel Function Review Committee. It worked throughout 2007, reviewing all department programs that were prioritized by their respective department heads and assigned a score. The report was approved by the county board as a guide to future board action. The draft recommendations and goals dated September 18th, 2007 included the following, which have been implemented. 1, Facilities Department takes over all facilities maintenance responsibilities throughout the county. Planning and Zoning Department to move to a central administration building. At that time, it was Pleasant Acres that was the target, but it turned out to be the Oshkosh by Gosh building. Parks Department evaluate the necessity of a swim park. It's gone. Finance to move to a central administration building. District Attorney to move to the Orrin King building. Airport to investigate expanding airport property to enable bringing new businesses in with accessibility to the runway. That's a reality and growing today. Clerk of Courts to move all judges, offices, and courts into one building. It won't take long for that to be accomplished. Treasurer to consider a move to a central administration building. Human Services to investigate family care as an option for delivery of services differently. Public Health to investigate county department combining with the cities of Neenah, Oshkosh, and Menasha. Information Systems to obtain county board emails for all supervisors and elective officials, and to move to a central administration building. I guess we've gone one step further with iPads for all supervisors. And last, child support to consolidate operations in one area. I am pleased to share with you that recognition should be given to our county executive, Mark Harris, and County Board Chairman David Albrecht on guiding the actions of the county board through the past decade in which these changes have been accomplished. If you'd like to see the full recommendations, I have a copy of them with me. I also have access to the full report. If you were interested in viewing that, I've got another computer that can take the disk that houses all that information. I'm sure it's also available from the county clerk if you asked her for it. But I thank you much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to address the board? That portion of the meeting will be closed. Is there any? First of all, I would like, at the last meeting, we made a new appointment that replaced former Supervisor Olson, and her name is Vicki Shorsey, was replaced to her, so she is here this evening. We approved her appointment at the last meeting, so I just wanted her to wave hi. Tonight's meeting, Supervisor Harp had asked to be excused. Supervisor Long has asked to be excused. Supervisor Rasmussen has asked to be excused. And Supervisor Kreischer had asked to be excused. He said he might be able to make it later, but he would try to get here. Our county clerk is giving a talk on voting machines and voting. so she'll probably be here, but she'll be late. But we are in very good hands with Julie here, so. At this time, I would like to ask County Executive Harris to come up and start his proceedings with the budget.
I'd like to start out very briefly with just a little overview and an explanation to.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Is it on?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to start with a very brief overview, and because we have several new board members, a little explanation of how this process works. With the county, we establish an equalized tax rate that's the result of the budget that will complete over the next several days. And that equalized tax rate is allowed to increase our tax levy by the percentage that our tax base, the value of property in the county, increases from net new construction. So this budget, as it currently stands, reduces that tax rate by 13 cents. But if you ask how that affects individual homeowners, you can't translate that directly into an impact for individual homeowners. Because what happens is we do our computations based on equalized values, which are values the state gives us of the market value of property in the county and in the political subdivisions within the county. We then tell each of those municipalities what their share of the county tax is, and they then spread that over their assessed values to the individual homeowners. So we can tell you on average what is going to occur, and the reason it's done that way is so that everybody's share of the tax is based on that community's market value rather than on their assessed value, because otherwise a community that had assessments close to full value would pay more in taxes than another community that was assessed at a lower percentage on similar property. So this makes it come out fair all the way around. And so if you wanted some guidance on where this budget as it stands now would leave the average taxpayer, on average their taxes will be very close to flat, probably a very small increase or a very small decrease, because the drop in the tax rate will largely just offset the appreciation of their property. So if your neighbors ask you, where are they going to come out, tell them that it will likely be close to flat, but that there may be exceptions. If someone has a piece of property that's appreciated a great deal more than others, and that's been reflected in their assessments, then their taxes will go up more than other properties, and the opposite's true as well. So I just wanted to give that explanation and tell you that most of our focus as we go through this budget is on the levy, which is the amount that we will be taxing for property tax, although most all departments have other revenues as well. And oftentimes that's what's actually driving how much we need in levy, is what happens to the revenues from other sources. So I think we're going to start out with the county executive budget, and if you go to page 80, that's where the employment chart is. So the county executive department has 2 full-time employees, myself and my administrative assistant, and that's the same as it was the prior year. You can see that the total levy for the department has changed a small amount from $232,000 to $238,000. And I'm available to answer any questions you might have on the budget.
Supervisor Powers.
I wanted to
relates to the entire budget is, I was noticing that workman's comp was going up 30 to 50%, and it wasn't until I got to like well into the 4 pages of 400 something that I realized that there was a reason that Human Services said it would, that they just said that it would. Why is it that workman's comp is going up such a degree?
Well, workman's comp is paid kind of centrally and then assessed back to the department.
He's turned off again.
Workman's comp is paid through the finance area, then assessed back against the departments. And occasionally we build up a surplus or a shortfall there, and then we have to change the rates. And probably, Chuck, if there needs any more explanation, you're probably in the best position to explain that.
Testing. Oh, okay. We have several different what's called internal service funds, which provide services to other departments. There's health insurance, property insurance, workers' comp insurance. And sometimes, in the case of workers' comp, the balance in that fund built up to a higher degree than we felt was necessary. So for the last couple of years, we've significantly reduced the rates that we charge back to departments. But now that fund balance is where it should be, so we don't have that surplus to credit back to departments. So this year it went up quite a bit.
Thank you.
So basically we have to really cover the full cost of it because we don't have the savings to apply.
Thank you.
Supervisor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Mark and Chuck, for putting this together. Mark, I just had two quick questions for clarification on page 10 in the overview. The first one is in the levy limit sections when you said we have applied about $5 million of reserves to the budget to stay within the levy limit. Now this is only the second one I've worked on, so I don't remember last year's, but is that normal for the amount taken from the reserves, or is that a high amount?
No, that is not normal, and that's the most we've applied in reserves in any of the budgets I recall. And that's because our net new construction number was only 1.3%. And that wouldn't cover both the increased cost of health insurance and a small raise for wages. However, we do look at the surpluses that we have in any given year. And in certain areas, we have more reserves than our target numbers. So this will still leave us above our targets for the reserves. We'll still have a lot of reserves, but it does raise an issue because it has us spending more money than our recurring revenues. So in a very, very long-term perspective, it would eventually become a problem.
And then my second question, in your conclusion section, just the last line when it says continued pressure in the form of levy limits will inevitably force the county to seek alternative revenues or to abandon some services valued by the community. I see that as concerning. Do you see that becoming an immediate problem, or is it more down the road?
That's a long-term problem, and that phrasing has actually been in the budget for years. But anytime your recurring expenditures exceed your recurring revenue, even if you have more than enough reserves to cover them, then you know at some point in time you'll burn through those reserves. We do have a lot of reserves right now, and those are actually itemized on page 45 if you'd like to look at them. It probably takes some explanation to understand them. The other thing is that we applied reserves in last year's budget as well, but not as much as this year's budget. But when the books were actually closed out, the reserves did not decrease. And part of that is some of the larger departments often have vacant positions, and we build our budget as if every position was filled. But really large departments like Parkview and Human Services often have vacancies so that you don't use as much money for payroll and benefits as you anticipated. But we only budget the positions we feel we should have to operate appropriately, so we always build in the full amount of salary and benefits.
Thank you.
Supervisor Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark, could you re-explain me and explain to the board how TIF districts that are initiated by the various municipalities in our county affect us positively or negatively on our budget. I guess I'm concerned because my district has had 3 TIFs in the last few years, and there's probably a target for more TIFs. So I really want to know when these municipalities create TIFs, how they affect us and our budget in any particular way.
When there's a TIF district created, that tax base in the district is not included in our tax base. So the money that would be normally their taxes, they still pay it, but it goes into a pool to help the project. For instance, they might have some incentives for doing a building or some incentives to make land improvements. And the amount they pay in goes to that instead of coming into our coffers or the city coffers. However, the new construction within the TIF district is in our net new construction numbers. So we're actually allowed to raise our levy by the amount of that new construction. So that 1.3% number we have undoubtedly includes some growth within the TIF districts.
Supervisor Binder.
I know I talked with you earlier in the year, Mark, probably like August or September, about maybe bidding out our health insurance. I know the city of Oshkosh bid theirs out this year, and they actually came in less, and I see ours is going up 2%. What was the purpose of not even at least trying to bid out our insurance, just to see where it would have came in? I mean, it didn't cost us nothing to send it out for bids, and we could have seen if we could have saved some money, and maybe our employees could have stayed at 10%.
We actually employ a consultant that advises us on that and investigates, but Mike Collard is in the back of the room and can probably give you a more precise answer.
There we go. Thank you. Yes, certainly health insurance and where we get our health insurance is something we look at year-round. We're already planning our health insurance program for 2019. But very aware of the market changes that have happened, and we do work with a consultant who provides us with a lot of that information. The recent development on the market, which the city has taken advantage of, is that some of the health care systems are once again, for the first time in 2 or 3 years, becoming aggressive and trying to, or in offering very favorable rates, but for a restrictive network. And that's what the city did. The city got quotes both from Network Health Plan, which is Allegiant, formerly Affinity, and from Aurora, trying to match the aggressive bid they got from Allegiant for their health coverage, which did go down, but it means they have to substantially narrow their network. And for instance, the city, I'm not sure exactly where they are, I know they're planning to go with Aurora, but that will mean their employees basically have to go to Aurora providers or else pay a much higher copay and so forth. And that was a late development in the market this year, and also not the strategy we were looking to follow, because our employees don't go to Aurora in large numbers. They're used to having the advantage of having a choice in which healthcare systems they use, and so we won't drop that too lightly. Something certainly we'll reevaluate next year if the cost differential is strong enough to make it worth it.
We are self-insured as well, that we hired administrators who administer the health insurance benefits, but the actual payment of claims is actually coming from us. So we're looking at the actual claims, but obviously the design of the plan and the networks that you use have an impact on that. But this year we actually have an increase built in the cost of the health insurance that was necessary, even after we shifted a larger portion of that cost back to the employees. And it's unfortunate we have to do that, but that's the only way we could live within the budgeted amounts we were given.
I know the city, I mean, they were basically self-insured, and then last year they went to basically a funded bidding it out. And this year, Network actually came in, I believe it was over 10% cheaper than Aurora. And then Aurora rebid it, and they still managed to save like 3.9%, where, you know, I just don't see why we every year wouldn't bid it out. It doesn't cost us anything.
Well,
we can at least see where it goes from there.
You'll end up changing providers every year. That's
Well, the city actually stayed with the same provider they had. The insurance isn't changing at all. My wife works for the city. I have the city's insurance, and nothing really changed other than basically saving 3.9%.
Well, we did just that. We gave an exclusive to the network, but then those county employees that were with Aurora and other providers had to switch providers. It can create a real hardship for people, but you also typically get offers that are very attractive to switch, and then that's recovered in the subsequent year. People will always give you a better deal to buy your business than what they'll
Well,
maintain.
like I say, Aurora actually, they're staying with Aurora. They didn't take the network. Aurora rebid it, and the city's staying with Aurora, and that's who they had last year. So they didn't switch. They just managed to save 3.9%, I believe, something
Yeah.
like that.
We've done that in the past. And we do compare rates.
Thanks.
Supervisor Haig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to the paragraph that was already called out on page 10 about the application of the 5.226 million from fund balance, I assume that that's the undesignated fund balance of $17 million that you pointed
That-
out on page 45?
Yeah, that's actually being drawn from a variety of fund balances, and I suspect a very large portion of that is coming from the separate fund balance maintained by Parkview, and their balance has gotten well above our target, and that's why we're applying it there.
So I'm showing on page 45 that Parkview proprietary fund unrestricted balance at about 6.8 million? Or, sorry, balance as of 12/31/17, we're projecting to be almost 9 million.
That sounds correct, but I have to look here. Yeah, it's anticipated that at the end of 17, that will be $8.88 million.
So then is the note one adjustment 2018, is that what looks like is coming out of there for that, going towards that 5.226 million?
I think we'd have to go back to their budget page. Chuck, can you give them a quick
Well,
answer? to that?
actually, on page 23, it gives a breakdown of that 5.226 million, where it's coming from. $2 million is Parkview, $3,046,000 is general fund, and then there's a couple other small ones.
And again, we applied reserves back in 16 to Parkview, but when the books closed, the reserves did not significantly decrease. We won't know for some time exactly where we come out in 17. But after the year is over and the books get closed, we'll then see how much they actually drew down the reserves. Generally speaking, you don't actually consume as much as you apply, and it has a lot to do with vacant positions.
So with regards to the 3 million that on page 23 says is going towards that 5.226 million, that would then draw down the undesignated fund balance to somewhere around 14 million?
It would draw down Parkview's balance, and Chuck actually has some projections in here.
Yeah, on page 45, the undesignated fund balance of the general fund projected at the end of 2018, at the end of the budget you were working on, is about $17,033,000, if it were to completely happen.
Okay, you're correct. So I misread this balance 12/31/17. We're saying is going to be just over 20 million, which
Projecting.
I think last month I asked you a question about money that was coming out of there, and you said it was around 17 million currently.
Parkview or general fund?
The general undesignated fund balance.
I don't recall. That could be.
Yeah, I think you sent me an email about
Yeah.
it too. We moved some money towards people who were retiring early or retiring. It was like 150,000.
Yeah.
So within the last, or just this quarter, fourth quarter, we'll be moving another $3 million.
No, that was a rough estimate. that I gave you. This reflects the whole year.
Okay, I guess maybe when we ask questions during board meetings, then if we maybe could have something other than rough estimates might be a little helpful. This is a little shocking to see this at over 20 million. Thank you.
The next
Supervisor
section,
Singstad.
Mr. Harris, going back to TIF districts, did we, approximately a year or so ago, did we receive, there was a TIF district that was closed, and did we receive some money from that?
yes, there was a TIF district that closed out that was overfunded. So we actually got our share of the overfunding when it closed. And then you get a small adjustment in, or we got a small adjustment in our tax base related to the closing of a TIF. That's actually very complicated rules, but you get a tax base adjustment upon the closing of a TIF under the current state rules.
So that was kind of an exception type deal.
Yes,
get mo-
it's,
to get money
to get that cash payout is a one-time exceptional item.
Yeah. No, just for my clarification, what do we mean when you say it was overfunded?
That the money, okay, the money that the entity with the business within the TIF was paying in to the TIF that would represent the same rates as if they were being taxed, that money actually exceeded the project that was being funded through the TIF, so that there was a cash balance in that fund upon the closure of the TIF.
Okay, thank you.
The next section is emergency management, and their chart of personnel is on page 267.
And the emergency management director is in the back also to answer questions if you have any.
And emergency management, the same as last year, has 2 full-time and 1 part-time employees.
Human resources and payroll and workman's comp, self-funded health, self-funded dental.
Their chart of employees is on page 128.
Supervisor Powers.
I'm sorry, I was going to speak about emergency management. Are we already done with that?
There was no other lights on it. I mean, there were no lights on at that time.
It was mine on.
Okay, go back to it.
I was just going to say that I was impressed with how much Linda was able to accomplish with just 2 employees. I was wondering, with the events in local schools that was listed on, I think it's 265, were those all schools or just public schools in the county, do you know?
Linda's in the back of the room and will take your question.
Hi there.
Hi.
It is with all schools that are willing to participate. We do work with public and private schools when they want to participate.
Okay, then I had a question on page 70 and 270 and 71. There was like a 2,000% increase in overtime, but wages were decreased. Why is there such a huge increase in overtime?
Unfortunately, 2 of my employees left this year out of the 3 of us. 1 retired and 1 left for a different position outside of the county. So the wages came in less with the 2 new employees. $2,000 is actually not overtime wages. It will be for the part-time employee. As she's getting trained and becoming familiar with how we do things here at the county, it may require her to work a few extra hours here and there. Payroll suggested that I put it in the overtime account.
Okay.
And so that would be straight wage, but it's in the overtime account.
Okay, then on page 271, there's a big jump in registration for tuition, meals, and lodging, which was probably a good thing, but then auto allowance did not increase much at all. How are you doing that? How are you getting people to get to all these registering for all these conferences without the auto going up?
Hopefully, the trainings, we have 2 new employees. Again, one is certified in emergency management, one is not certified. And in order for us to receive our grant dollars, you need to have that certification. So I'm lucky enough that we have other partners in the region that will travel along with, that are newer employees that will travel along with my employee. So we are able to save some in the travel expense that way, but the rest we had to increase as our employee becomes certified.
Okay, and on 272, you're not doing anything with membership dues. Are there some things that you all should be joining? Is there? I mean, it says 0, which is great, I suppose, unless there are things that you think you ought to be joining.
All of my office members, including myself, are members of Wisconsin Emergency Management Association, and that is the local, or well, the state association that we should belong to.
Okay, and then the operating licensing fee, is that to cover operating the next gen?
Can you give me that account number, please?
Yes.
And I don't have my bifocals, unfortunately,
Okay,
so bear with me.
It's 53553, operating licensing fees of $500, which you hadn't had anything in the years past. And I was wondering if that was for the next gen. Because that's the only thing I could think of that was,
It's on page 272. Do we have an extra
272.
book that we can give your department heads back there? Really? I mean, do you have another book somewhere that they can have it so they can see what we're talking about?
Give it tomorrow.
I have it right here. It's
But she
just taking
doesn't
me a
know what
minute
page
to read
she's
it.
referring to, page 272.
That is not for Next Gen. Next Gen is a new siren software that we will be using to run our siren program. We do have licenses for a weather radar system that we use, and we are required to pay a license fee every year on that, and that is called GR Level 3.
but this is the first year you've asked for money for that, right?
I think we were told that we needed to move it to a different account.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go on.
Human resources and payroll are on, their chart of employees is on page 128. They're budgeted for 2018 for 8 full-time and 2 part-time employees, the same as 2017. One thing you'll notice with almost all these departments, that they've held their budgets roughly flat, except for changes in wages and benefits. So almost all the change in these departmental budgets is a result of changes from payroll and benefits, unless additional staff was added.
Looks like I'm still lit up here, and I have a question. Is that all right, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Okay, on page 133, there's a 417.33% increase in small equipment. A lot of departments were having increases in small equipment which weren't identified. 870% increase in medical supplies, and 161% plus, almost 162, in professional services. And I was wondering if someone could explain that for me. First was small equipment.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm just trying to find my backup sheets to find the details.
We're
so
back here again.
I have it here. The small equipment increase is that for 2018, we decided to budget a laptop for the office use when traveling to other county departments, as well as 2 second monitors to be used by our payroll and benefits people, Jane Hughes and Jane Ledke. They thought it would be greatly advantageous to have 2 screens to be able to look at. They deal with a lot of very complicated spreadsheets.
Okay.
So those are not yearly expenses. We've never budgeted for those before, so that's the increase in small equipment.
Medical supplies, the next one down.
Medical and dental supplies are primarily pre-employment physicals, and our recruiting has been growing substantially over the last 2 years, and we require new employees to go through pre-employment physicals, and so the cost for those has been going up. So we're primarily trying to match the actual expenses we believe we'll need for the new hires. There's also a line in there for flu shots for employees. Most of the flu shots for employees is paid out of the health insurance fund, but since we offer those to all employees, regardless of whether they have insurance, we need some money in there. It's about $870 for employees who aren't on the health insurance to still get the flu shots.
Okay, and then farther down, under contractual services, professional services, 161.95% increase in professional services.
Yes, actually, most of the professional services we budget are kind of contingency amounts. In other words, we're never sure we're going to have to spend them, and we usually don't and hope we don't. They're for things like attorney's fees, grievance filings, and so forth. Independent hearing officers, if we need to retain those. We've managed to avoid much of that expense. So actually, we reduced all of those categories this year, but then we combined the employee assistance program, which in previous years had been budgeted through a separate wellness account, which we eliminated this year. And so about $24,000 from that is now being added into professional services into that account that we've used for legal fees and so forth.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Was there anything else, or was that your?
That's everything on human services.
The next department is information systems. There-
And dental.
Oh. We can go back to that. Yeah.
That's workman's comp. One 134? That's workman's comp.
I'm responsible for that budget.
He just said information suite.
If there's no questions, then we'd consider questions on self-funded health insurance, which we actually talked about a little bit already, and self-funded dental. Should follow workman's comp.
It's on page 140 and 141. Okay, there are no questions, so go on.
Okay.
Self-funded dental insurance. Does anybody have any questions on that?
The next area after that is information systems on page 177.
Supervisor Keller.
While we're still on human resources, I hope I could ask the question
Sure,
about
go ahead.
the performance, pay for performance plan. I'd like to know if there's any measurement as to whether we are getting better recruitment or better retaining of employees, or is there any way that we can tell how that plan is working for the county?
If I could give just my short observations. I think it is a good review system. I think the concept of having part of the raise tied to performance is good as well. But because we're restricted to the 1.3% net new construction, our raises have to be so small that it's really difficult to have a significant difference between an average performer and a strong performer under the system. So I think we've got 1.75% of payroll as the total pool available for the pay for performance system. So there's only small variation between the strongest performers and average performers. And Mike, maybe you want to add more.
Well, and it is a relatively small amount, but it does provide at least some mechanism for employees to move from perhaps the minimum salary of the grade for their position up toward the control point, which is what our pay study believes would be the average salary or market salary for a good and experienced employee in that job. So that was our biggest issue that we tried to address with the comp study and the pay for performance. I don't have numbers because we don't really have any good way to track exactly how many people turn down offers or leave the county employment because of those specific issues. But anecdotally, I definitely heard repeatedly a number of times before we had pay for performance that it was an issue in recruiting and that we'd have to tell people this is our pay offer and you're not going to make any more. It's just going to be there. As a new employee, they felt they wanted to move up. So it was an issue, and I'm not hearing that anymore. At least we have something to tell new employees that there is a way to move toward the control point, through the merit pay system. So I think it is a benefit, but I'm far from being able to quantify it in any meaningful way.
Recently, I think there was a increase in the cost of a retirement fund. I guess more people were retiring, so we had to approve additional funds for that. Does this pay for performance have any effect on that? I mean, I would think you should be able to predict fairly well by age who's going to be retiring, and evidently it was unable to be done because it was a higher cost than you thought. So does this pay for performance have any effect on retaining people, or are they still retiring for some other reason at early ages?
I think the pay for performance has some effect on retaining newer employees. In other words, they don't come, get a few years experience without any way to move people up in the pay grade. They would then say, oh, I'm not getting paid anymore now that even though now I'm a more valuable employee, having that experience, I can go to work for another county and they'll recognize that experience and give me a higher offer. We were experiencing that to some degree before we implemented pay for performance. But, so I think there's some impact there. Again, I can't measure it. Not so much, I don't think, in terms of the retirements. The retirements are mainly occurring from people who have already moved through the pay grade and are in the upper ranges. It's more a matter of demographics. We definitely have been experiencing a bubble of people in that experience level and age level that they can retire, and we've looked at those numbers and we knew it was coming, and it's hit us. So over the last year or so, we've definitely had quite a bit more in retirements, but I don't think there's any way that we could have prevented that. It's really mainly due to the demographics of our workforce.
Thank you, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Supervisor Powers.
On page 186, there's a 238.4%, 0.04% increase in small equipment. There's a lot of small equipment being purchased. Do you know what that was for?
I'm sorry, which budget are you
Page
looking?
186, line 53522.
That's technology replacement fund. That's the tech replacement fund. That would be Patty Francour's area.
We're not on that page yet.
This is information services, right?
Supervisor Haig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to, and just to follow up on Mr. Keller's question about measuring the success of the performance program, were there not certain standards set up or some type of a metrics set up where we could identify success of the program when we've made this venture?
No, I don't believe we ever discussed any metrics for identifying the impact on recruiting or retention.
So we have no data that could tell the board or county taxpayers that a fairly expensive program had any impact on what was gleaned, may have an impact. That I don't understand. I think this is maybe a key point in in budgeting programs is we absolutely need to have a basis and information data that will support whether or not a program was successful or not. So I would hope that by this time next year, we would be able to answer that question. Was this program successful based on any certain set of data, or was it not? I think it's vitally important that going forward, when we start these programs, that we could identify, not just prioritize needs of programs countywide, but also identify success or failure thereof. Thank you.
I think I need to correct the one thing that was suggested. This was not layered on top of the existing pay system. This is instead of the base increases that the employees used to get. So they're getting their increases in a different form, and it's impacted by performance, but their increases are not in total or on average higher than they otherwise would have been, because this was substituted for the base increases that they had been getting in the past.
Yeah, I don't think that that is what anybody assumed or presumed. I just think that if there was a shift where a number of employees were brought up to a certain level, and that cost the county a lot of money, I think that was spread out over at least a couple, if not a few years, breaking that up. So there was a fairly large cost to the program, not just hiring the consultant to do the program, but the implementation thereof. So, I mean, based on that.
That wasn't pay for performance, so that was the payroll study. And what the payroll study did was establish the entry-level pay and the ranges for the various job descriptions we have in the county. And you're exactly correct, that there was a certain number of employees that fell below the range that they were classified in after that study. And to bring everybody up to the minimum of their range would have required about $600,000 for the 1,000 employees we have. So we awarded 1/3 of the difference between where people were in the bottom of their range if they fell below the range. And this budget includes the second of the three parts of that adjustment. So I think there was about $200,000 in this budget that represents bringing employees that were below their range closer to their range.
Right, as were their employees who fell above pay grades in certain levels too, who were gold starred or red starred or black starred.
Yeah,
but those two programs went hand in glove. I think at the end of the day, we did one to implement the other and to help facilitate the other. So with that said, I still think that we need to have some type of a system where we can identify if something that we implemented is working or not. I mean, how are we gonna know going forward if it's a good program, not a good program, if we just don't have any idea or no data supporting what we did?
I'm going to just suggest, though, that a lot of what you're talking about, whether people leave for positions outside the county or go to other counties, a lot of that going forward and in recent years is impacted based on where private sector raises are versus county pay increases. And clearly the private sector has been moving at a significantly faster pace than county payroll in recent years. And in fact, is probably anticipated to be around 3% increases for 2017. Those won't be spread evenly over the private sector, but that's what the average is expected to be. We can't match that because we're limited to net new construction. So we're not allowed a sufficient amount of money to match the private sector raises at this time. But there's also other differences in our compensation packages. And I think certainly long-term government employees, because they have a lot of time into the pension system, are likely to stay to complete their career within that pension system. Where we're going to have difficulty is in hiring new employees and with people that might choose to depart when they're in the early years of that pension system, because they might be able to get significantly higher compensation in the private sector. But while I'm limited to net new construction, there's really very little I can do about that. And I will tell you, there is another item in this budget that you'll see when you get to Parkview, that we put an amendment sheet in the budget to allow for shift differentials. Because when you're competing for CNAs, and there's a real shortage of CNAs now statewide, most employers pay a differential for working the second and third shift, and we were not doing so. So we've built money into this budget to allow for that. And that's the type of thing you're talking about, where we have to do something in order to retain our employees. But it is very difficult when you're very tightly limited on how much increase you can have in the total levy.
Supervisor Bender.
I think it's hard to retain your employees, like when you take like the insurance going up 2% this year and you're giving them 1 3/4. Somebody making $35,000 a year this year never got a raise again. Last year we took that $750 that we used to pay on the insurance for their copay, and they didn't get a raise last year. So how do you keep somebody when you hire them today? That's the most they're ever going to make. Every year they get less and less, and we balance the budget on their backs. So I can see why they leave. I mean, you look at your highway department, you lost 2 of your key personnel again this year. Pretty soon you will have no, basically, ability to hire qualified people because nobody's going to work. We used to have good benefits. The benefits basically just keep getting stripped down less and less. We used to pay a fair wage. We don't pay a competitive wage anymore. So it's harder and harder for basically personnel to get people to take these positions and to stay there because there's no incentive. What you hire them for today, next year they're going to be making less.
I think your observation is correct, that, and this was something that I experienced too when I was in the private sector in banking, that the cost of health insurance for lower paid employees was going up faster than their wages were going up. So the take-home pay was going down. And this year we're shifting part of the health insurance costs onto the employees. Now, they pay a smaller share than is prevalent in the marketplace today. But we're changing them. If they do a health risk assessment, they were paying 10%. Going forward, they'll be paying 12%. And it does pose that problem you're talking about. In other years, we made changes to the deductibles, and that hits people that are sick greater than people that are well. But it all comes back to that fact that we only have 1.3% to work with on the levy. So we can't, and even with the health insurance, even with shifting from them picking up 10% to going to 12%, we're still increasing the cost of the health insurance by something like 7 or 8%. So even though the county's absorbing a significant cost there, some still had to be shifted onto the employees in order to stay within the limits we're allowed. And then that's also what's driving the need to apply some reserves to this budget. I think we're now heading to information systems.
No, we'll finish the finance, the general services. Is there anything, or was there any more questions on finance? I don't think we really hit it hard. Okay, we're hitting it. You're there. You're on, Chuck.
So if you want to go to 152?
It's 149. 148 starts.
Yeah. The finance department is budgeted for 6 full-time employees for 2018. That's the same as what they were budgeted for in 2017. And in all these budgets, right after the chart of employees, there's a summary of significant changes that sometimes would help highlight things that are changing, but there isn't any large items in this budget.
Supervisor Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 156, again, there was a huge amount, it went from $100 to $1,220 on small equipment. What small equipment are we getting? And then on page 157, I'll ask them both at the same time, 157, a 780% increase in professional services. Those are my two questions on finance.
Test.
The small equipment line, what that is a lot of departments are starting to purchase these desks that you can lift up so you can work standing up. And I put 2 of those in the budget for next year. They're about $600 a piece. That's the small equipment line. And what was the other line that you referred to?
Professional services on page 157, it's 55014.
Okay,
went
what
from
that is,
$500
there's an accounting pronouncement that requires that we have an actuarial study done every other year. And this particular one is our other post-employment benefit liability, which is basically the post-retirement health insurance, where we allow people to continue on the county's health insurance plan after they retire. They pay the full premium, but they're still on the plan. Anyway, there's what they call an implied subsidy, and we have to estimate that liability. And accounting rules require that we hire an actuary every other year to do that. That's most of what that increase is. If you look 2 years back, it was about the same amount.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Wingren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark, you said, and on page 152, it states there are 6 full-time employees in this department. For your 2018 budget, how many employees are you going to hire just to replace Chuck?
Oh, at least half a dozen.
I would think so.
Supervisor Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 148 is the list of program descriptions for the finance, and there's one in there, financial reporting, which is what we're looking at. And looking through this report, I find that there are eight programs that subdivide themselves by program. There are another approximately 19 or 20 that do not. What is the difference between those? Why is there only 8 and why is there 20 that are not?
I don't understand the question. The 20 programs.
Yeah, you've got, under county clerk, you've got a separate list of programs and
Yeah.
a cost for each of those programs. A cost for each of those programs. Under facilities management, you've got a list of programs and a cost for each of those programs, and so on. But under human resources, county executive, 20 others, budgets or subdivisions, whatever you want to call them, you don't have that. What is the difference?
Well, typically with the larger departments, we break it down more. And that's why you see that with the larger ones.
So
they have separate org codes set up to track a lot of that, whereas finance department, we don't have a separate org code to track accounts payable versus accounts receivable and so on and so forth. So we're not really tracking the costs on a program basis. Some of those bigger departments, they have a lot of different org codes set up. Okay. So for the bigger ones, we do show that detail.
Well, human resources is a pretty big division.
Pardon me?
Human resources is a pretty large division. I'm sure they've got a number of different programs.
We don't have multiple org codes set up in human resources. Are you talking human resources or human services?
Well, both.
Human resources doesn't have, there's only one org code set up in human resources for tracking expenses. Yeah. We don't break it out by the programs that they list in the program description.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, human services, there's quite a number of different programs there.
Yes.
And they're not broken out in any way by
well, they
cost.
are by, I think human services, when you look at their budget, there are 5 divisions, and there's a sheet for each of the divisions there. But individual programs, we don't cost those out separately. That's a huge undertaking to do that.
Yeah. It'd be valuable information, though, to be able to track each program, how well it's doing or how well it's not doing. Thank you.
Supervisor Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chuck, I support your buying the small equipment for the raising of the desks that go up. And my question is to the county executive, Is there a policy now that if the department wants to pay for this type of equipment, they can pay for it? And the reason I asking it like this is because I was at a health conference and I was talking to a couple of health department workers, and I said, I used to work in an office store. I said, wouldn't it be nice if you had just did this for the deck? And I went to the Property and Facilities Committee meeting, and I was told by the department head that that can only be done is if someone requested it and needed it for medical reasons. So if the department wants to purchase this for their employees, can they do it without going through the Property and Facilities Committee?
We're doing it on a test basis in some departments, and department heads could build, one or more of these in their budget on a test basis, but that would have to go through the budget process. And that's, finance had a couple people that they thought would benefit from this. So they're trying two on an experimental basis, but I don't want to pay for hundreds of these all at once.
I'm not opposing what you're doing, Chuck. I'm just asking if other departments want to do it, can they do it if they put it if they put it in their budget? That's what I'm asking. It's the same.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring, the other thing is, you know about the water cooler situation, which the health department people and the human service people are concerned about. I mean, I brought it up to Mike Elder, and he's kind of shot it down, and we've had to say, well, why don't we pay? Why don't we as the committee and the department pay for it, and that's when we get it done. I'm okay with it. You used to tell me, are we changing our policy to where if the department pays for it in their budget, can they get it? Any of these requests?
Well, they would have to get it approved through the budget process, and we're not necessarily going to approve every request. But I believe facilities and human services are working together to get coolers on the water, on the bubblers, basically. There was a reason why they didn't put coolers on those bubblers, and that was because of the age of some of these buildings, that if water sits in those systems for a long time, they were picking up trace amounts of copper. So we wanted people to run. The water coming into the buildings was fine. It was coming from the city water supply. It didn't contain excess copper or lead. But we were finding that some drinking fountains that were very infrequently used were having trace amounts of copper above what you'd like to see. So we've changed out some of the bubblers to make them lead-free and to make them copper-free. But we wanted people to run that water so that they weren't drinking water that had sat in that system, let's say, over a weekend or overnight. What we're finding is that the water took too long to cool, and people were drinking water that was at a higher temperature than what they wanted to. So the human service area asked if they were willing to include it in their budget. Could we go back and add cooling units to some of the bubblers? And we are.
Supervisor Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chuck, just a couple quick questions. When I first came on the board, you and I had a conversation about the budget books and trying to transition to the iPads or other means other than the print cost. So I meant to ask you last Thursday at P&F, and I forgot. Why the change all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, but why the change to go back to the budget book instead of promoting that they use the iPad?
Well, I think the last couple of years, there's only been like a half a dozen supervisors that wanted the electronic versus the paper version. So I just figured I'd print them all, and if they didn't want to take a printed copy, they didn't have to.
Okay. Second question. And my, I can't recall from my previous life as it relates to significant changes, because when I went through the book, I was looking for the significant changes explanation as it relates to the line items. I don't see the rhyme and reason that I recall I don't recall the rhyme or reason that you require department heads to do that. X amount of dollars or X percentage increase or what?
It's, I can't remember, I think it's $3,000 or 5%.
Okay.
Required an explanation.
Okay. But theoretically, this is supposed to be able to answer the questions about why something went up 780%.
Well, if 780% is only $50, I wouldn't put an explanation in for that. If something went from $10 to $50, that's like a, what, 500% increase?
So-
Does it really need a written explanation?
So going back to my point is that it wasn't just the percentage increase, it was also the dollar amount?
Yes.
Okay.
Supervisor Powers?
I was going to ask a question about bubblers. When we talked about facilities management, is this the time to bring up the bubbling systems? What was that?
Yeah, why not? Go ahead.
Okay, when we have to have departments that are without any drinking fountains whatsoever for long periods of time, which has happened about a year ago in human service buildings, I don't know why we can't rent those bubble things with the bottles that turn upside down, and then when the drinking fountains finally get fixed, whatever we've rented as a county get moved to another building that's also having difficulty. Is there some reason why there are some buildings that have to go without drinking fountains for long periods of time?
Well, we didn't have any building that had all the fountains that tested positive for either copper or lead. We had a few fountains in several different buildings that did. And what we determined was that the water coming into the buildings was good, but many of the very old bubblers had lead components or copper components, and this would be true of older bubblers anywhere. And so that we determined that if water sat in those bubblers, they were basically bubblers that had infrequent use where we were getting the highest readings. And it was because the water was sitting perhaps in a copper coil for a long time. So what we did is we switched many of them out to these new lead-free, copper-free bubbler systems. We did experiment with not having chillers on the bubblers so that people would run the water more. But you're asking specifically where we shut down a bubbler, why didn't we install
Yes.
a bottled water system? And it was just a matter of cost. We felt that employees could walk to another floor or to another part of that same floor to access a bubbler rather than going to the expense of getting the bottled water. It was just a cost savings measure.
Well, if you're paying an employee to walk up and down, run up and down stairs to get the water that he or she wants, when those rental things are not that much, and when you don't need it in one spot, it could be, since we as a county have been the ones who rented them, then they could be moved to another location that also is experiencing trouble with their drinking fountains.
Yeah, but the drinking fountain problem was largely a one-time problem. We did have employees complaining about the taste in one drinking fountain, and then so we ran tests on the water to determine that there was in fact copper in that water, and that was causing the taste. So then we ran tests on fountains in all of our buildings and discovered that there were many fountains, not all of them, but many, that had trace amounts of copper, and a few that had trace amounts of lead, which is much more serious.
Yeah.
So the lead ones were all replaced, and the copper ones, we now have a policy that we run the water in the mornings before the employee's there, so that you're not drinking water that sat overnight in those systems. But it was in new buildings, it was in old buildings, but they're largely, the more serious problem was much older bubblers. And I suspect that's true anywhere people are drinking from an old bubbler system.
Okay.
$160, general services.
So on 160 for general services, we have one general service employee. They report up to Chuck Ornstein in finance, and that's the same as last year. And you can see the changes in that budget.
167, property liability insurance.
The property and liability insurance, that's billed back to departments. And Chuck, I'm going to allow you, since you handle that, to go ahead and answer any questions they might have.
Supervisor Powers.
No, I was gonna ask about, general services.
Go ahead.
Page 164, $1,800, which was not budgeted in the past for temporary employees, on page 164.
That's probably to cover sick time and vacations, isn't it?
No. It's basically, we only have one employee in that department, and when that employee is on vacation, we typically haven't really had a good arrangement for coverage there. And we've worked out something with the clerk of courts where we're going to reimburse them for an employee that they have to cover when we have that person on vacation.
Okay.
Before we weren't doing that. It was, we were able to get by without it, but their department wasn't able to provide an employee to do that anymore, but they, I think we're offering somebody extra hours in their department to come down to help out.
Okay, thank you.
Property and liability insurance. $173, information systems.
Information system is budgeted for 17 full-time employees. In 2018, that's the same as it was in 2017.
Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A 2018 goal, number 7, let me see, that's accomplished. Number 7 is to continue to provide training classes to users of our standard software. I'm interpreting that to be our iPads. And what I may, if I could respectfully request that county board supervisors be given semi-annual training sessions to promote greater usage of the iPads. Now, I tote my iPad around every place I go, but I still feel dependent on the paper because for me it's easier to navigate. If I could build my skills better to utilize the iPad, if I could, on a regular basis, get rid of extra emails in some fashion, because I'm getting these messages telling me you're getting at the maximum of your email box. I throw my hands up and say, what am I going to do? I'm going to get rid of this, I'm going to get rid of that, I'm going to get rid of the other things. Oh, but there's something
Okay,
very
rather than
important.
talk to the wall back
There
there,
is
talk
very,
into your
there
mic.
is very important, there is something very important that I want to keep, because it's a document that I got from one of the departments. And I don't know how to keep it. I don't know how to save it. I don't know where to do with it. I'm trial and error, and for me, the easiest thing is to just keep that email. If I keep that email, I can keep that attachment, which gives me the document that I want to keep. If I had instruction, I could, you just take this and you save it in this fashion. You set up a file. Unfortunately, I wing it in the digital age. And if you're going to expect us to utilize these advantages, I think you have to invest some time. It's the same thing about an adjustment that Jennifer in your department had sent out emails to us, and I said, well, if you want us to make these adjustments, why don't you just come down to the county board session and we can make the adjustments for everybody? And of course she says, well, we're going to overtax the Wi-Fi system if everybody is gonna, try and do that at the same time, what I intend to do to get my iPad up to date, I don't remember exactly what that issue was, but I'm going to come down, I'm going to make an appointment to come to Information Services when I have another meeting to come down to Oshkosh, and I'm going to say, okay, do what you have to do to get me in compliance. I mean, you're expecting us to be next generation millennials. I mean, we're not millennials, and you gotta give us a little training on how to get this thing up to speed.
Go ahead.
Is there a question in there, or should I just comment?
Well, what I'm saying is that you have established a goal and objective to continue to provide training classes to users of our standard software.
Yes.
I interpret that to include us county supervisors using iPad software. And I'm making a request that we as supervisors be given perhaps a semi-annual training session to get us up to speed so we can handle all of these requests, because I don't have, I use 3 different computers, and I'm not a master of any of them, and I fumble through each of them, but I do enough to get things done that I need to do. But if you're expecting us to increase our efficiency and save paper money, you've got to give us a little more leeway, and you got to give us a little more guidance.
Paul, we will have a training session on the iPads, but I think she's referring to, she has functions with other department heads and other personnel in Winnebago County, all the people that work here to train them on computers. I think that's what they're referring to.
Well, we do want
I work here too.
We
Not
do
us
want to
36
consider
grade
the
lines.
board an extension of the users, for sure. And we did provide classes. What we would like to do is hear from you on what your needs are. We don't have a regularly scheduled once a month, every third Tuesday is going to be training, because we don't have time for that. If we get a bunch of calls from users, we'll set something up. If we get calls from you guys, we address it. You got to use the help desk. We got to know where you're struggling. We'll definitely put classes together, but we don't have time to have a regularly scheduled one. But we definitely will do that.
Supervisor Powers.
Well, keep the paper mills running.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do see in your explanation of that you've addressed 130,000 plus in small equipment, or yes, but what at almost $130,000, what are we getting for small equipment on page 186?
I'm assuming that's technology replacement, Department 23?
Page 186.
Okay, so let me just recap how, I'm not sure if you're familiar how the technology replacement account works.
I'm on Information Service Department. That's what you're in?
Yes.
Okay.
So the fund that you're looking at is called our Technology Replacement Fund. And what that is it's our inventory countywide of all the devices that we need to support. And what we do is we have a very comprehensive spreadsheet that lists the inventory. We give it an age that we anticipate it to last, and those things come up automatically as they age out for replacement. So what you're looking at is what's coming up for 2018 for replacement. There may be one year that has 0 small equipment. There may be another year that has 10,000. It happens that the devices that are aging out for replacement
Are expensive.
are that, yeah. And it might be PCs, it might be switches for the infrastructure. It's whatever's in our inventory. That account 23 or fund 23 is all based on inventory.
Okay.
Does that answer? Or
I'm still not sure what you got, but if you're saying that things age out and you know they're going to age out and you had to replace them, I'll take that.
Supervisor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the new supervisors, the middle supervisors, and the old ones like myself, I've had numerous discussions with information systems. And anybody who has a problem, you give them a call and they'll try to take care of it right over the phone. In fact, last year I was even down in Florida and I was having a problem. And I tried to talk with Jennifer, but she was gone and they gave me some young man. But what I'm trying to tell you is that information systems goes out and above, beyond to help us out. So if you have a problem, don't be afraid to give them a call. They will take care of you. Thank you.
Page 86, Corporation Council. Pardon? Let's see, I don't have that on this one. What page is the budget?
467.
Corporation Council. Oh, then I'll go back to that.
Okay. Corporate counsel is on page 89 is the chart of accounts. And in the corporate counsel office, there's 4 full-time employees budgeted for 2018, the same as 2017. The list of significant changes is on page 90. And John Bodner is here to answer any questions you might have.
Supervisor Locke.
This was for Patty on the last one. When we got that important update to your Apple device, I just took my iPad down to the office down there and gave it to them. They 1, 2, 3 fixed it and it was all done.
Okay.
They're very good at that.
We were on Corporation Council, page 86. Does anybody have any questions? Register of Deeds, page 463.
On page 467 is the chart of employees. The Register of Deed is budgeted for 7 full-time employees in 2018. That's the same as 2017. And the Register of Deeds is generally a profit center where they charge for their records or access to their records to, for instance, mortgage companies generally offset their costs.
Page 96, the county clerk.
The chart of employees for the county clerk is on page 99. They're budgeted for 3 full-time and 1 part-time employees, the same as in 2017. And the list of significant changes is on page 101. The county clerk's budget fluctuates with the number of elections in a given year. And that always has a big impact on that budget. And Sue Ertmer is here to answer any questions.
Supervisor Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sue, you and I have had a couple conversations about delivering of packets, monthly meeting agendas, et cetera. And I see that in your postage and box rent, you went up about $1,700. Now, that's not $3,000, but considering that we have iPads and that this body voted for the iPads, if that's going up because of mailings to county board members, I guess I'm questioning whether or not that money is needed or whether we should start telling people to use their iPads.
Well, 90% of our postage cost is board expense. either committees or county board packets. We do mail out some correspondence, and, you know, there's some things besides county board business that we distribute, but it is primarily county board. And if we could eliminate those, that cost would definitely come down.
What other line items are impacted by the lack of use of the iPads?
The print and duplicate, that would be on page 105. It's 73003. It's an interfund cost. We do all of our postage gets billed down through general services. So we did take some of that down with, in talking with Chairman Albrecht, because a lot of the postage and mailings that we do is county board related. He took some of that expense into his budget, so that's why you do see some of a reduction there. But if we were able to, you know, eliminate large packets or large mailings for the board, that would decrease even more.
So it's not a case of a decrease in the dollar amount, it's a case of shifting the dollar amount to the county board budget?
We did part of it this year, yes.
Okay.
Supervisor Powers.
Well, on my book, postage and box rent is at 0. There's nothing on postage at all. So I don't see that as an issue. But I do want to say thank you to Sue and Julie and the staff and volunteers who worked on the election recount, because I know that was a lot of work and a lot of people involved, and I want to thank you for the work you put on that. Thank you.
Supervisor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Sue, I was just looking at, talking about labor costs. I mean, not only the postage, but we have costs of labor. Do you know about how much per month it costs in labor to make up all these packets?
I've got those figures, but I didn't bring them with me. I know I've presented them to the Information Systems Committee. I can get them tomorrow, but I didn't bring them with me tonight.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Supervisor Haig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take one step back before I forget to ask the question for Finance Director, Mr. Ornstein. Is there a page in this budget that shows, on page 45, we had that figure for the undesignated fund balance. Is there a page that shows where those dollars came from? Like a breakdown of what departmental budgets or from what sources those millions of dollars came from?
Nope. You'd have to look back at every year and see how each department ended up.
So you must have
all the way back.
You must have a spreadsheet somewhere that shows.
No.
Can we get one? Can I get one?
There isn't one.
So we don't know where that money came from.
Well, if the general fund had a surplus at the end of the year, the money goes into fund balance. But I don't have a breakdown. We don't keep that of which department had contributed to it. You'd have to go back to the beginning of time of the county if you wanted to.
No, I mean
know
just for
exactly.
2017. There was how many millions of dollars
Oh,
went into the undesignated fund
for
balance?
2016 or 17? 16?
For 2017, how much money went into undesignated fund balance?
We haven't closed out 2017 yet, so there is no answer to that.
Based on your projections of there just being over $20 million in undesignated fund balance, 12/31/2017.
Mm-hmm. You mean
How
that
much-
990, or what makes up the 20 million, or?
Based on your projection on page 45 of there being a $20 million undesignated fund balance, 12/31/17, how many millions of dollars went into fund balance in 2017? Or are projected to go into fund balance in 2017?
If you look at the schedule, the balance at the end of 16 was 21 million. At the end of 17, it's going to be 20, so it's going to drop about $1 million.
So it's actually going to drop.
That's a guess. I can't tell you what's actually going to happen. The year isn't over yet. That's a projection.
At what point during this year was its lowest point?
Don't know. I'm not prepared to answer that question.
Supervisor Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sue, getting back to the mailing cost from that, how many municipalities will mail out agendas, meeting notices to the general public? And since we do it, is that just your policy or?
I don't know what other municipalities do. I know some counties have gone purely electronic. They don't, distribute anything by regular mail. I have talked to the IS committee, and I've spoken with Corporation Counsel Bodner, and we can handle these requests differently. Instead of just automatically mailing all these agendas and minutes out, we'd have to have a written request as an open records request, if I'm not mistaken. But what we've done is we've kind of tried to cut back on the hard copies. And so over the past couple of weeks, when we do mailings, we've included a small note in there that we are no longer going to be sending out hard copies to some of these people that have been on our mailing list for years, and they will be obtaining that information off the county's website instead. And so far, we haven't had any people unhappy with that decision. We send them the website, and they can go and look for the information there. So we are trying to reduce some of those mailings.
Supervisor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Sue, especially for coming to the IS meeting to kind of give us more information about this. Going back to the postage and printing, just for clarification first, you said the two line items, it was print duplicate and postage and box rent. Those are the two line items for postage and printing?
Correct. And
Okay.
those object numbers start with 7 because they're interfund costs. Because it's paid by the General Services Department, and then we budget for it, and it goes back to the General Services, is how I understand it, or we're basically being billed by another department. And so it's an interfund cost, so that's why there's no numbers up above where it starts with a 5. But if you go down into the 7, the object code starting with 7, that's where you see our costs for postage, box rent, and forms and copies.
So for the 2017 adopted, that 2,500, is that was the cost, the final cost estimated that we occurred for printing and postage? So
Yep.
that comes out to about, what, $5,000 combined?
Correct.
And you said 90% of that goes towards the county board packets and
A rough
stuff?
estimate, yes.
Okay. I guess I would just make a point of echoing what Brooke said about, I think that's pretty concerning. $5,000 could be spent elsewhere. We have the iPads, and I think we should move towards using them. But thank you for all the numbers, Sue.
Sure.
Page 112, County Treasurer.
On page 116 is the chart of employees for the county treasurer.
Supervisor Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed on page 115, the problem we have with receiving tax money that's supposed to go to Winnebago County, Illinois. Does this happen a lot? That we have to, and are they getting some of our tax money that they need to send to us?
Wisconsin people are smarter than Illinois people. Periodically, yes, we do, especially when it's their installment due date time. We are receiving Winnebago County, Illinois payments. We just got one last week again. So having the portal on the website will be very nice.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mary, a couple of years ago, you said you would wish that when you're moved, if you're moved, and now you are moved, your office from the courthouse to the administration building, that you wanted I think you call it a deposit box or whatever, so people can make after-hours deposits. Is that going to be done in the next 6 months to a year, or is that still on hold?
I do not have it in the 2018 budget. What I plan on doing is visiting with the departments that are in the administration building to see what other departments would be able to use it as well. If it would be of benefit to public health, and other departments that are in that same building.
If there's no more questions on treasurer, we still have the county board. and that's on page 514. The county board has no employees, other than board members themselves. So there's no full-time county employees associated with support of the board. The summary of significant changes is on page 516. And the most significant item on there is that in the prior year's budget, there was a request for equipment. Largely, it was replacing the OCAT equipment that was at the end of its useful life. And if the county wanted to continue OCAT coverage, we had to replace that equipment. So that was in the prior year's budget. That's no longer in this year's budget, and that's why that levy amount has decreased. And the county board chair is here to answer any questions.
Well, thanks a lot. Supervisor Haig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to the mission statement, for example, the second sentence there, evaluate the results of the policies, ongoing programs that have been previously established. Measure the effectiveness of personnel assigned to oversee the policies and programs. It's kind of a broad statement. You know, I understand that to some degree. I don't know that we do that.
Well, I think committees, I think what I'm referring to is committees that, the people that are involved in the committees, like, how should I, take the Judiciary Committee, they meet, they had the clerk of courts come and they went over the different budgets with with their departments that they're responsible for.
I mean, for example, a few people tonight have buzzed in, they're talking about the iPads and paper packets. I mean, this was something that was passed in the budget 2 or 3 years ago. I think there was an expenditure of $36,000 or so. And I don't know that that's ever been evaluated. I don't know that that program as established has ever been analyzed or evaluated for any type of a savings. You know, and I don't know that we do that for any number of projects countywide. Measure the effectiveness of the personnel assigned to oversee the policies and programs. I'm not even sure, I mean, I haven't been on the board for a decade. I know some members have been here considerably longer than that, but I'm not even sure I know what that means.
Well, like I said, I think that, like the highway department, that highway committee, they review and go over the budget, and I think they go independently, each committee goes over the budgets on, that's what I'm kind of referring to.
With that said, under 2017 accomplishments, number 1 there, approved construction of a roundabout at the intersection of County Road CB and Oak Ridge for safer driving conditions. It's still a concern for me personally, and I say that in regards to having been in a couple accidents this year. And I still don't know why, I really can't fathom why there's not even temporary lights up at that intersection at this point in time. I'm thinking, which might be a mistake, but I'm thinking that if somebody was involved in a serious accident, or really any accident at that intersection, that this board had approved the expenditure, that there was a stipulation in that resolution that the highway department could put up at his discretion a temporary signal at that intersection. If somebody gets in an intersection and understands that there could have been a temporary light constructed at that intersection, but there wasn't, what is the county's liability?
I would have to ask our corporation council.
I mean, I say that as a rhetorical question because I think we all know what the answer is. I think that
But it was my understanding that there were flashing lights put up to slow down, or some type of warning signals were put up there.
Part of that resolution was that per the discretion of the county highway department head, he could put up temporary stoplights there. I was involved in an accident at a fairly dangerous intersection in Calumet County. And I looked over that resolution just to see if there wasn't any stipulation like that in there, because that would be red meat, I believe, for litigation. So I'm just asking, maybe begging the question, I think we know what the answer is. Maybe we should get those temporary lights up before there's an accident, much less the loss of another life at that intersection. The second question maybe I have is in regards to the 2018 goals and objectives. Number one there is continue to partner with Outagamie County to support UW-Fox Valley. Plan for long-range improvements to this facility by working with UW-Fox Valley and Outagamie County. Not that long ago, Facilities and Property Management voted down to hire a consultant to reevaluate the food vending area. And I haven't seen that there have been, over the course of the last couple months, even UW-Fox Valley Board of Trustees meetings. I know that there's been speculation and even some action taken about consolidating the efforts of the UW systems, schools, and I'm wondering what that means. What number one under 2018 goals and objectives means.
Mr. Chairman, can I address the UW-Fox Valley question? I did meet today with the Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh and with the Dean of UW-Fox Valley. And they talked at length about the upcoming vote of the regents with regard to consolidating the systems. But both made it perfectly clear that there's no intent to leave those campuses, and that in fact UW-Fox Valley is one of the largest two-year colleges and plays an essential role in providing a stream of students that transfer in to the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh to fill in the slots from freshmen and sophomores that left college. So it plays an important role. They assured me that there's no intention to collapse either the Menasha campus or the Fond du Lac campus. This is merely to pull them closer together, make it easier for credits to transfer, and they're really looking at it as an opportunity to improve the service. They have no intention of changing how those campuses work. But I would argue that continued investment by the two counties that sponsor UW-Fox Valley is probably the best way to ensure that will continue to provide a service to our residents, especially those that are working part-time or are place-bound, or that want to save money on the first 2 years of their college education before they transfer to a four-year institution. So I'm very optimistic about the future of UW-Fox Valley continuing for the long term.
I think my questions are more in regards to partnering. In evaluating the number of students that come from the different counties there, I think what we're finding on a fairly consistent basis is not only is there a declining enrollment, but there are a declining number of students from Winnebago County. So when it comes to partnering, does that mean rather a long-term 50-50 partnership, or is that looking more like at some point entering into a 60-40 type agreement, or is there at some point trying to reel in Calumet County as students continue to come from Calumet County? I just don't know. I've been to several of the meetings, and it sounds like even Outagamie County is not quite sure what that does look like today, or what it might look like in 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years.
Well, I would argue that you would not want to disrupt the partnership by requesting a change in the original agreement, and that the idea is that it offers our residents and the residents of Outagamie County and surrounding area an option that they otherwise would not have. I would prefer that we just continue with the current arrangement rather than do anything that might jeopardize the partnership. I suppose the Outagamie County Board would say, well, UW-Fox Valley is located in Winnebago County, and for sure it is. But one of the big advantages that's terribly overlooked is that by sponsoring the facilities at UW Fox Valley, we draw down a huge state payroll that is flowing into this community and the surrounding area. The issue with Calumet County comes up, and it's something that's been talked about over time. I do think, though, the larger number of counties you have involved, the more difficult it would be to move forward on projects. Because then instead of just needing 2 county boards to agree with a capital project, you would need a third. And the same issue comes up at all the 2-year colleges. Some are sponsored by municipality cities, some are sponsored by counties. We're actually the only one that has a co-sponsor with another county.
Thank you.
Supervisor Gabbard.
Just a quick question, no innuendos here. Do you, Chairman Albright, know how many counties in the state have a scholarship program?
I believe,
Could I find out?
as far as I know, we're probably the only ones.
We're the only one?
I don't know of any others. There could be others, but I don't know of any.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Singstock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm one of the newer members on this board, so my question is, when was this board given their last salary increase? I've been told it's 10 years or more. Is that correct?
That's correct. Well, I believe so, yes.
Why such a long period?
Well, that's something that, so now you're gonna, in January, or in December, you're gonna have to take out papers to run, so if you wanna have, you have to change that, I believe, Mr. Bodnar.
Can I just indicate to Mr. Singstock what the rules are? The state statute, not just with regard to the County Board of Supervisors, but every state office, is that the pay for that office has to be established, has to be set before the first date that papers can be taken off for that office, which in the case of the county board is December 1st, correct?
Right.
Of 2017 for this coming board. So you need a resolution, there should be a resolution coming, I would hope so, from Personnel and Finance Committee setting salaries or per diems for the county board for the next board session. You cannot change salaries for any elected office in the middle of that, in the middle of the term.
Well, thanks for the update on that, but my question is, why has it been so long?
Well, you have to ask yourselves that because you guys, I shouldn't say you guys, you folks,
okay.
you folks set your own salaries.
All right, well, there's probably no interest in it. That's what I just want to learn.
So it's up to you. I mean, you know,
No,
if you want to increase your salaries, you need to do it yourself.
But now my further point, please. Looking at, on page 514, there's a chart there, and Mr. Albrecht, it shows you're doing a fantastic job. Out of 7 years, you return 5 years of it, you turn money back. You lowered your tax levy, which is showing you're doing a good job. But I guess my point is, for those who don't understand the finances of county government, a raise could be given to this board and would not be an increase to the taxpayers. I find it very interesting, some of these board members earlier speaking about nickel and dime items out of a $175 million budget. They're worried about $500 there, they're worried about $2,000 there, $3,000 here. But when it comes to $1 million, $5, $4, $3 million projects, they don't get involved to know that the project is really justified. I find that very interesting. And I really wish somebody logically could explain to me the rationale behind something like that. I don't think they have an answer because they don't understand what they're talking about.
I do think it's beneficial to point out for any audience watching on television that the board doesn't actually get a salary. They get a per diem amount for attending meetings. And I think it's under $70 for a whole day meeting and somewhere around 40.
66 for, like a 66 for a board meeting, 44 for a committee meeting, that's a half a day.
Yeah, so, you know, if the public's thinking that there's a lot of compensation to county board members, there is not. I think the
Supervisor-
entire 2018 budget amount for 36 board members is something like $121,000. So most board members are making very little in terms of compensation. I just didn't want them to think that you guys were drawing a salary from that discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep, go ahead.
I still have the floor, right? But my point I want to make, before somebody tries to misquote me, my point is, because we've been turning money back, the salary increase could have been given and been no additional cost to the taxpayer. And if anybody doesn't understand it, I'll speak to you after the meeting about it. I'll explain it to you.
Supervisor Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to piggyback on a couple of things that Mark has stated about UW Fox Valley. I don't know how many of you realize that for our meager contribution to that facility, we get an economic impact of a little over $20 million a year, as well as $4 million in scholarships to individual students that a lot, if not most of that, spent in our county. So I think even any kind of talk about rearranging our agreements and things of that nature is folly, total. Thank you.
Supervisor Shorsey.
Greetings from Ken Olson and District 15. So I'm glad to be with you all. And Mr. Chairman, I just have a question or just some clarification about how the goals and objectives are set for the county board. And I'm accustomed to a board level emphasis being put on strategic issues and obviously budget issues, that sort of thing. So could you tell me a little bit about who decides? Do we go through a process
I
to
do.
set our goals and objectives for the year?
That was put together by the chairman, David, me.
Okay, so you did that, okay. Because I was a little confused in seeing that some of the things seem to be more operating kinds of things in projects. And if they're strategic projects, I would say that would make sense to me. But that's a question I had, to make sure that we as a board were focusing on those strategic issues and executive level types of issues as a board versus operating issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Scholarship program, page 521. There are no questions on the program. That's as far as I had planned to go for this evening. I thought it would have went a little longer.
You can do miscellaneous.
Okay. What page we got?
523. It's a miscellaneous and unclassified items.
Yes, page 523. Supervisor Haig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding other financing uses, reserve contingency number 59502, how much of the 300,000 budgeted from 2017 was actually spent?
I'm sorry I didn't bring that with me. But we do, that is in the monthly report we send you. a schedule showing what was used from it, but I don't have it with me tonight.
In regards to line 59503, reserve salaries, the reason I asked you the question at the last board meeting about the transfer of the $150,000 was because I know we have this reserve salary contingency. Based on what was needed there last year, are we anticipating the same type of exodus of retirements next year where that's going to be in that same category? Should this salary contingency fund be higher to cover that, or is it better to take it out of the other fund?
That's actually budgeted on a separate line item. I'm trying to find it. Account 51120 on page 527 has $360,000 budgeted for sick leave payouts. That was what we did the budget transfer for a month or so ago. So we actually budget a separate amount to pay out the sick leave payouts.
And I'm going to take this time to point out that we froze sick leave payouts for most employees back in 2005. Some union employees, it was a little bit later. But people are no longer accumulating sick time for payout. But employees that are retiring today had accumulated that prior to 2005 for the most part. And that's where the payouts are coming from. Over time, as amounts are paid out, the liability there will start coming down. And eventually, when you have all employees hired after that 2005 date, or a little bit later with some of the unions, you'll find that there won't be any additional sick time payouts.
So just a follow-up question then in regards to payout wages 51120. That was the account you identified, right, Chuck?
Yes.
So if I'm understanding that correctly, the $210,000 that was adopted for 2017 was entirely spent, and we actually added $150,000 to that.
Yes.
Okay, so we're anticipating then that there's going to be just as much spent next year in payout wages as there was in 2017.
Again, I can't predict how many people are going to retire, how many people are going to get payouts. The objective is to try to have enough there to cover it, so we don't have to come back. Maybe that's enough, maybe it's not. I have no idea who's going to retire next year, other than me.
Well, I certainly congratulate you on that. Is there a way where we can find out, or if I can find out, kind sir, please, if I can find out if there was anything spent out of reserve contingencies 59502?
Sure, I'll bring that to you.
Thank you, sir.
Supervisor Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we're discussing sort of miscellaneous, maybe this is a time to ask this. A lot of departments said this increase is due to the reclassification of employees, rankings, and it was going to be over a 3-year. Where are we in that 3-year period? And are they all in the same?
The 2018 budget is the second year of the 3-year period. So we've already, to the extent that employees were below the minimum of the range,
Yeah.
we gave them 1/3 of that in 2017.
Okay.
They'll get the second third in 2018, and the last third will come in 2019. It's roughly $200,000 each year.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I didn't ask any other department heads to come tomorrow morning.
Debt service, if you want.
Okay. Supervisor Finch?
To adjourn until 8:30 tomorrow morning?
Okay, we just want to do debt service yet, and then we will adjourn. He suggested he wanted to keep going, so.
What page?
534.
Okay, we will adjourn, and we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 8:30.